It was just another busy evening at the small family-owned restaurant. The atmosphere was warm, the kind of cozy that made people feel at home even on the busiest nights. The tables were filled with people enjoying their meals, laughing, talking, and relaxing. The soft clink of silverware and the occasional murmur of conversation created a background hum, but it was the sound of plates being served and glasses being refilled that kept the rhythm of the night moving. The waitress, a young woman who had been working at the restaurant for months, moved through the space with practiced ease. She was quick and efficient, always with a warm smile but never drawing too much attention to herself. She was the kind of person who liked to blend into the background, doing her job without fanfare. Most of the time she didn't mind. It gave her a certain peace to just go unnoticed, to do the work and keep her thoughts to herself. She had always been a little quieter than most, preferring the calm of solitude to the bustle of crowds. But tonight there was something different in the air. It wasn't the usual chatter or the familiar routine. There was a restlessness in the room, a sense of anticipation that she couldn't quite place. As she moved between tables, she caught snippets of conversations, people talking about their plans for the weekend, discussing work, and even chatting about the weather. But underneath all of it, there was an energy, a feeling that something was about to happen. She didn't know what it was, but it made her feel more aware of her surroundings. It was as if the room was holding its breath, waiting for something unexpected. Maybe it was the way the light caught the edges of the silverware, or the way the music from the jukebox seemed to blend into the background, creating a subtle rhythm. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on, but she couldn't ignore the feeling. As the night wore on, she carried drinks, served meals, and made small talk with the regulars. She didn't mind the work, it was simple and it kept her busy. But every time she walked past the piano in the corner, she felt a tug in her chest. The piano had always been there, almost as if it were an afterthought tucked away in a corner where it couldn't take away from the flow of the restaurant. But tonight it seemed to call to her. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because the evening felt different, or maybe because, in a way, she had always wanted to play it but never had the courage to. She didn't know. She had played piano for years, but it was something she kept to herself. It wasn't a secret exactly, but she never talked about it. It was her personal escape. It wasn't something she wanted to share with anyone. Not because she didn't love it, but because it felt like something private, something just for her. But as she glanced over at the piano, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight might be the night. She was startled from her thoughts by the sound of the manager's voice. He was a friendly guy, always cracking jokes to keep the staff in good spirits. "Hey, we've got a special request tonight," he said with a grin. "The birthday party in the corner, they want some live music. I was thinking maybe you could—" She felt her heart skip a beat. Was he serious, her? She hadn't played in front of anyone for years, and the thought of doing it here in the middle of a bustling restaurant made her stomach churn. She opened her mouth to decline, but the words didn't come out. Instead, she just stared at him, unsure of what to say. The manager looked at her, clearly expecting her to say something. "I know you can play," he said. "You've done it before. It's just a quick little thing. Nothing fancy. What do you say?" She swallowed hard. The piano was right there, just a few steps away. It would be so easy to just walk away, pretend she hadn't heard him, but for some reason she didn't. Her fingers twitched at her sides, and before she even realized it, she found herself nodding. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The manager smiled as though he had known she would say yes. "Great. Just play something soft, something people can enjoy while they eat. We don't need anything too loud." She nodded again, her heart pounding in her chest. As she walked toward the piano, her mind raced. What had she just agreed to? She had always played for herself in the quiet of her room, not for an audience. The thought of playing for a group of strangers made her stomach turn. But she couldn't back out now. She was already moving toward the piano, and there was no turning back. She sat down on the bench, the coolness of the keys under her fingers sending a shiver down her spine. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. The room was still loud with conversation, the clinking of glasses and the sizzle of the kitchen in the background. But as soon as her fingers touched the keys, everything else seemed to fade away. The music was the only thing that mattered now. She played softly at first, her fingers tentative on the keys. The piece she had chosen was simple, a melody she had played countless times before, but never in front of anyone. The sound filled the room, low and gentle, the notes floating in the air. She could feel the tension in her body begin to ease as the music took over. It was the same feeling she always got when she played. It was like stepping into a different world, one where she could leave everything else behind. The longer she played, the more the room seemed to quiet down. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, but it didn't feel as strange as she had imagined. It felt comforting. It was as if the music was a bridge connecting her to the people around her. She didn't have to speak. The music spoke for her, and as the notes filled the room, she realized something she hadn't fully understood before. This was her way of communicating with the world. The music continued to flow from her fingers, her confidence growing with every note. She wasn't thinking about the people in the room anymore, or how they might be judging her. She was lost in the melody, lost in the way the music made her feel. For the first time, she felt free, like she could finally breathe. The restaurant, for all its noise and bustle, became quiet around her. The chatter softened, the clinking of silverware faded, and for a brief moment the only thing that existed was her and the piano. It was a strange feeling, one that she hadn't experienced before. She had always been the observer, the one who kept to the sidelines. But now, for the first time, she felt like she belonged in the center of it all, her music filling the space in a way nothing else could. As the last notes of the piece lingered in the air, a silence fell over the room. The guests, who had been talking just moments before, were now still. She opened her eyes, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys, and saw them staring at her with wide eyes. She had done it. She had actually played in front of people, and it hadn't been as terrible as she had imagined. In fact, it had been kind of beautiful. The silence lasted only a moment before a single round of applause broke it. Then more followed, and soon the whole room was clapping. She felt a flush rise to her cheeks, but she couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. It was the first time she had been recognized for something other than just doing her job. She wasn't just the quiet waitress anymore. She was someone who had done something special. After the applause died down, she stood up from the piano, feeling a little embarrassed but also proud. She had done it. And somehow the world felt a little different now. Maybe it was the music, or maybe it was the fact that she had taken a chance, but she knew one thing for sure. Things were starting to change. As she walked back to her station, the manager gave her a thumbs up. "That was amazing," he said with a grin. "You've got some real talent." She smiled back, still trying to process what had just happened. It was just a small moment, just a song played in a busy restaurant, but it felt bigger than that. It felt like the start of something new. It was a busy night at the small-town restaurant, and the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversation filled the air. The evening was unfolding as usual, with people enjoying their meals and celebrating a birthday at one of the corner tables. The lights were dim, the atmosphere cozy, and everything seemed to be running smoothly. The waitress, a young woman who had worked at the restaurant for months, moved between tables with a quiet grace. She had learned the rhythms of the place, the way the guests liked their drinks, the time it took for the food to be ready, and when to check in without interrupting anyone's conversation. She wasn't a stranger to long shifts and busy nights. Most of the time she didn't mind. She loved the work, the simple satisfaction of helping others. But tonight there was something different in the air. Maybe it was the energy in the restaurant, a kind of restlessness in the guests that had yet to be fully explained. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, even as she delivered plates of food and refilled drinks. Her mind wandered, and for a moment she imagined herself somewhere else, playing piano maybe, or doing something else she loved. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. She couldn't afford distractions. Tonight, like every other night, she was focused on doing her job well. She was about to drop off a round of drinks at the birthday table when one of the guests, a jovial man who had been the center of attention all evening, looked up at her with a grin. "Hey, you know what would make this party even better?" he asked with a wink. "A little live music. I bet you've got a talent or two hidden up your sleeve, huh?" She froze for a moment, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The question caught her off guard, and she didn't know how to respond. She had heard this kind of thing before, the teasing, the half-serious requests. Most of the time, she just brushed them off with a polite laugh. But something about the way the man said it made her hesitate. "Oh, I'm just here to serve drinks and food," she replied with a nervous smile, trying to deflect the attention. She hoped he wouldn't press the matter further. But he was persistent. "Come on, don't be shy. We've got a piano right there in the corner. How about you play us a little something? It'll be the best birthday present we could get." Her eyes darted toward the piano, which sat quietly in the corner of the dining area. She had passed it hundreds of times, but had never once thought about playing it. The idea of sitting down in front of all these people, exposing herself in that way, made her stomach twist with anxiety. "I really don't think," she began, but the man wasn't listening anymore. He turned to the manager who had just walked by. "Hey, tell her to play something for us. It's her big chance." "We're all waiting," he said with a chuckle, making it sound like a joke. The manager, a big guy with a warm smile, looked over at her. She could see the playful glint in his eyes, and for a moment, she thought he was joking too. But then he raised his eyebrows and, with a shrug, said, "Why not? Go ahead. Show us what you've got." It wasn't that he didn't believe in her. It was just that she had always been so quiet and unobtrusive that nobody had ever thought to ask her. No one, not even the manager, knew about her piano skills. She had never told anyone about it, not because she was embarrassed, but because it was something that felt so personal to her. It was just a hobby, something she had picked up when she was younger, something she did for herself and never thought to share with others. The pressure was building. Everyone in the restaurant had started to look her way, some with curious smiles, others with genuine interest. She felt the weight of their gaze and her heart started to race. What was she going to do? She could just walk away, pretend she didn't hear them. But something inside her, the same feeling that had been growing all night, urged her to do it, to take the chance, to step outside her comfort zone and show them who she really was. For a moment, she hesitated. Her palms were sweaty, and her legs felt like they might give way beneath her. She glanced back at the piano once more. The keys seemed to call to her, a silent invitation. She had played the piano before, of course. It was something she had done for years, just a way to relax and escape. But performing in front of a crowd, even a small one like this, was different. She wasn't sure if she could do it. But as the seconds ticked by, she realized that there was no turning back. If she walked away now, it would feel like a missed opportunity. And something about this moment, the way it felt like the right time, made her feel like she could do it. Without saying another word, she nodded and made her way over to the piano. Her feet felt heavy as she walked, each step feeling like it took longer than the last. But when she reached the piano, she took a deep breath and sat down on the bench. The crowd was quiet now, waiting. She placed her hands on the keys, her fingers trembling slightly. She closed her eyes for just a moment, finding a small sense of calm before she began. The first note was soft, almost hesitant, but as she played, the music began to flow from her fingertips. It was a piece she knew well, one that she had practiced over and over in the solitude of her apartment. She had always loved the way it made her feel, a sense of peace and beauty that nothing else could match. Now, as the notes filled the room, she realized how much she had missed it, how much she needed it. The music seemed to take on a life of its own. Each note was carefully placed, and soon she was playing with a confidence she hadn't known she had. The tension in her body began to ease, and she felt a sense of freedom, as though she were in a world all her own. The people in the restaurant had stopped talking altogether, completely captivated by the sound of her playing. She could hear their soft gasps of surprise the way they leaned in closer, drawn in by the beauty of the music. As the piece came to a close, the last notes lingered in the air, hanging like a delicate thread between the past and the present. She opened her eyes, not sure what to expect. The room was silent for a moment, an almost magical silence. Then slowly the applause began. It started with a few claps, then grew into a full wave of appreciation. She smiled, a little shy but also filled with a sense of pride. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to make such an impact. The manager, who had watched the whole thing with wide eyes, was the first to stand up. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I had no idea you could play like that." She looked around at the guests who were clapping and smiling at her. The man who had requested the music gave her a thumbs up. "You've got real talent," he said. "You should do this more often." For a brief moment, she didn't know how to respond. She had done it, but now that it was over, it felt surreal. She hadn't expected this kind of response, and it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. For the first time, the people around her were noticing her, not just as the quiet waitress, but as someone with something valuable to offer. The applause slowly died down, but the feeling of warmth and recognition lingered in the air. She returned to her duties, but now as she walked between tables, she couldn't help but smile. Something had shifted, and she knew that she would never be the same again. The night had moved on, and the restaurant buzzed with the usual noise of laughter and conversation. But there was a shift in the air, a quiet energy that hadn't been there before. The waitress couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she could feel it. A sense of something new, something exciting. She continued to move through the restaurant, taking orders and refilling drinks. But every now and then she caught glimpses of the guests, who seemed to be looking at her with newfound interest. Some smiled warmly, others exchanged knowing glances as though the performance had changed everything. She wasn't sure how to feel about it. She had always liked being behind the scenes, out of the spotlight. But tonight, for the first time, it felt like the spotlight was on her, even when she wasn't aware of it. When she went to the kitchen to collect the next round of drinks, the chef, a tall, gruff man with a soft spot for her, gave her a surprised look. "Never knew you could do that," he said, his voice almost too casual, as if he was still processing what had happened. "You've got some serious skills, kid." She smiled, her cheeks turning pink. "I didn't want to make a big deal of it," she said, shrugging it off, though she was secretly proud of how well it had gone. "Well, you've definitely made an impression," he replied, his voice gruff but approving. "People won't forget that anytime soon." She nodded but didn't say anything more. She wasn't sure if she wanted to talk about it. It felt strange, like a part of her had been revealed that she wasn't ready to share. It wasn't that she was embarrassed, but she had always kept her love for music to herself. It was her thing, her private escape, and now it felt like everyone knew. The thought made her a little nervous, but there was also a strange sense of pride in it. As the night went on, she couldn't help but notice how the mood had shifted. The guests were friendlier, their faces brighter. Some were even complimenting her, thanking her for the performance. It was as if she had done something extraordinary, and in a way she had. But to her it was just playing the piano. It was something she loved, something that had always made her feel alive. But seeing the effect it had on others, seeing their joy and appreciation, made her realize just how powerful music could be. Later in the evening, the man who had first suggested the piano performance came over to her again. He was with a group of friends, all of them still talking about the performance. He smiled as he approached her, his expression warm and sincere. "You really blew us away tonight," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I mean, I knew you were talented, but that was something else. You should do it more often." She shook her head, a little embarrassed. "I don't know if I could," she replied. "I mean, it's just something I do for myself. I never thought about doing it in front of people." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "You should consider it. You've got something special. People would love to hear you play." His words lingered in her mind long after he walked away. She wasn't sure what he meant by, "People would love to hear you play." Was he suggesting she perform regularly? The idea made her nervous, but there was a small part of her that wondered if he might be right. What if there was more to her love for music than just a private hobby? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. She finished her shift and went home, her mind still buzzing with the events of the night. She hadn't expected any of it. The performance, the praise, the way people had looked at her afterward. It all felt surreal. She had always kept her talents hidden, never letting anyone see that side of her. But now it felt like the world had just caught a glimpse of something she wasn't sure she was ready to share. As she sat on her couch, still in her uniform, she reflected on what had happened. Maybe she had been too cautious, too afraid to let others see who she really was. After all, she had always loved playing the piano, but she had kept it to herself. What if she had been missing out on something bigger, something more meaningful? The idea of sharing her music with others, of performing for an audience, made her heart race. It was a scary thought, but also an exciting one. In the days that followed, the restaurant was different. People came in asking about her performance. Some even made requests, jokingly asking if she would play again. She couldn't help but laugh, though part of her wondered if they were serious. Still, she couldn't deny that a part of her was flattered. She had always been the quiet one, the background figure in the restaurant. But now she was someone people noticed. It felt strange, but also rewarding. One afternoon, as she was preparing for another busy evening, the manager stopped by her table. He had a knowing smile on his face. "You know," he said, leaning in slightly, "we've been talking, and we'd love to have you perform again. Maybe we could make it a regular thing." Maybe one night a week? Nothing big, just a little music while people enjoy their meals. Her heart skipped a beat. The thought of performing in front of a crowd regularly made her nervous. But at the same time, she felt a spark of excitement. This was what she had always dreamed of in some way. A chance to share her music, to let others hear the things that had always lived inside her. "I don't know," she said, still unsure. "I've never done something like that before. I'm not sure if I'm ready." The manager chuckled, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "You've already done it once, and you were amazing. You don't have to be perfect. Just come and play, enjoy yourself. People will love it." His words made her think. Maybe she didn't need to be perfect. Maybe it wasn't about being flawless. It was about sharing something real. For the first time in a long time, she felt the pull of something bigger than herself. She didn't want to hide her talent anymore. Maybe it was time to let people see who she really was, to let her music be a part of her life in a way it had never been before. That night, she agreed. She would play. Not every night, but enough to make it a regular thing. She didn't know where it would lead, but she was ready to find out. And as she sat down at the piano the next week, her fingers pressing the keys once again, she realized that this wasn't just about playing for the guests. It was about finding herself, about letting her music be a part of who she was. She wasn't just the quiet waitress anymore. She was a person with something to offer. And that in itself was something to be proud of. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind for the waitress. What had started as a simple request, a spontaneous piano performance on a quiet evening, had quickly transformed her life. At first it was a little awkward. She had never imagined herself playing regularly in front of people, let alone as part of the restaurant's entertainment. But as the days passed, something inside her shifted. She had always loved the piano, always found peace in the music. But now it felt like more than just a private hobby. It felt like a part of who she was, something that connected her to the world in a way she had never expected. Her first performance after that night felt even more nerve-wracking than the first. She sat at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly, as she looked out over the restaurant. The room was filled with guests, laughing and talking over their meals. She took a deep breath, then let her fingers press lightly against the keys. The soft sound of the music started to fill the space, and she could feel the tension in her body begin to ease. It was like stepping into another world, a world where she could just be herself, where the only thing that mattered was the music. As the weeks passed, the performances became a regular part of the restaurant's charm. Every Friday night, she would sit at the piano and play for the guests. Sometimes it was classical pieces that she had practiced for years. Other times it was something lighter, something more contemporary. The more she played, the more comfortable she became. It was no longer just about performing. It was about connecting with the people who came to listen. The guests were always kind, offering her words of encouragement after each performance. Some even made special requests, asking for their favorite songs or for something that reminded them of their own lives. The waitress loved hearing their stories, the way music could bring memories rushing back. She hadn't expected to become so intertwined with the people who came to the restaurant, but as time passed, it felt like a new kind of family had formed. They weren't just strangers sitting at tables anymore. They were people who shared something special with her, whether it was a song that made them smile or a moment of connection that made them feel seen. One evening, just as the restaurant was beginning to fill up, a couple walked in. They were older than most of the guests, and they had an air of quiet elegance about them. The man, with a gentle smile and a calm demeanor, glanced around the room and then made his way over to her, who was setting up at the piano. "You're the pianist here, aren't you?" he asked, his voice warm but with a hint of curiosity. "I heard you play last week, and I wanted to tell you, your music is beautiful." She was taken aback by his words, as she always was when someone complimented her performance. "Thank you," she said, smiling shyly. "That means a lot to me." The man nodded and gestured to his wife, who was sitting nearby. "She's a big fan of Chopin. We both are, actually. We come here every week, but we've never heard anything like the way you play. It was, well, magical." The compliment made her cheeks flush, but she was grateful for it. The idea that her music had touched someone so deeply was more than she had ever hoped for. "I'd be happy to play some Chopin tonight," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside her. "I'll play something special for you." As the evening went on, the restaurant filled with chatter, and soon it was time for her performance. The couple watched her from their table, and she felt the familiar nervous flutter in her chest. But this time it was different. There was something about their kindness, something about the way they had spoken to her, that gave her the courage to play with a little more heart. She started with a gentle piece, a delicate waltz that had always been one of her favorites. She felt the music as it flowed from her fingers, each note landing with a soft, comforting rhythm. It was as though the piano had become an extension of herself, a place where she could speak without words. The couple smiled as they listened, their eyes closed in appreciation. It was a moment of pure connection, and for the first time she realized that the music wasn't just for them. It was for her too. After the song ended, the applause from the guests was soft but genuine. She had played from the heart and they had noticed. As she prepared for her next piece, the couple approached her again, their faces filled with gratitude. "You have a gift," the woman said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've brought us so many wonderful memories tonight. My husband and I used to dance to Chopin when we were younger. It's been a long time since we've heard it played like this." The man nodded in agreement, his eyes glistening. "Thank you for sharing your music with us. It's the best gift we could have asked for." Their words, simple as they were, filled her with a warmth she hadn't expected. She had always played for herself, for the love of the music, but now she understood something more. Music had the power to touch lives, to bring people together in ways words couldn't. She wasn't just playing for the guests anymore. She was creating memories, moments that would stay with them long after the night ended. As the evening wound down and the last guests left, the waitress packed up her things, still feeling the warmth of the couple's words in her heart. She had always known that music was important to her, but now she understood that it had the power to change others too. Every song she played had the potential to brighten someone's day, to make them feel something they hadn't felt before. The next week, the restaurant manager approached her with an idea. "I've been thinking," he said, a thoughtful look on his face. "You've been amazing. The guests really love your music and it's been such a hit. How would you feel about doing a special evening? Maybe once a month we could make it a big event, a night of music, where you play for an entire evening, just you and the piano." She was taken aback by the suggestion. The thought of playing for an entire evening, of becoming the center of attention in such a way, made her nervous. But she couldn't deny that there was a part of her that liked the idea. It was a chance to share more of her music, to let it touch more people, and for the first time she realized that she was ready to embrace it. "I think I'd like that," she said, smiling at the manager. "I think I'm ready." The night of music event became a hit, with guests returning again and again to hear her play. Each night was a little different, a new opportunity to explore the music she loved and share it with others. The feedback from the guests was overwhelmingly positive, and the more she played, the more confident she became in her abilities. But it wasn't just the music that had changed her. It was the way she saw herself. She had always been the quiet one, the background figure, but now she was someone who was seen, someone who had something valuable to offer, and that was a feeling she had never expected. She was more than just a waitress. She was an artist, a storyteller, someone whose music had the power to bring people together. As she sat at the piano one evening, playing a soft melody as the restaurant hummed with the sound of happy conversation, she realized that she had found something truly special. She had found her voice through the music, through the piano, and it was more than she had ever hoped for. It had been several months since the first time she had played at the restaurant. The once quiet waitress had transformed into something different, something more confident, something with a purpose. The piano had become her second home, a place where she could truly express herself. She no longer felt like the background figure in the restaurant. Now she was an integral part of it. Her music filled the space, and people came just to hear her play. Each week she looked forward to the performances. They had become a rhythm in her life, a comforting and familiar part of her routine. The anxiety she had once felt at the thought of performing had faded. She still got nervous, of course, but it was a different kind of nervousness now. It wasn't the paralyzing fear she had felt before. It was the excitement of sharing something personal with others. It was the joy of knowing that her music had the power to move people, to make them feel something deep inside. Her performances weren't just about the music anymore. They were about the connections she had formed with the people who came to listen. There was the young couple who had celebrated their anniversary at the restaurant and had made a special request for a song they used to dance to in their youth. There was the older woman who came in alone every week, sitting quietly in the corner, always with a book in hand, but who had once told her that the piano playing made her feel less lonely. There were the regulars who had been coming for years who now stopped by just to hear the music. She had touched their lives, and in turn, they had touched hers. They had become more than just customers. They were people who had shared moments with her, moments that were made more meaningful by the music she played. And in a way, they had helped her grow, helped her see herself in a new light. But despite the joy she found in her performances, there was a part of her that still felt uncertain. She loved the piano, loved sharing her music, but there was still a feeling that she hadn't fully explored the possibilities of where this new path could take her. She had always kept her dreams close to her chest, never daring to speak them out loud, but now, as she looked around the restaurant one evening after a particularly moving performance, she realized that she had changed. She wasn't the same person she had been when she started. She wasn't the quiet waitress who hid behind the counter. She was someone who had the courage to stand in the spotlight, to let people hear her voice. Still, the thought of taking the next step, the thought of making music a bigger part of her life, made her nervous. Could she really do it? Could she step out of the comfort zone of the restaurant, of her small, safe world, and push herself further? It felt like a leap, and one she wasn't sure she was ready to take. It was during one of her performances, as the restaurant filled with the warm glow of evening light, that she found her answer. It was a busy night, the restaurant bustling with guests, the chatter and laughter filling the air. She had just finished playing a particularly moving piece, a song she had learned years ago that had always been her favorite. As the last notes faded into the air, she looked up to see a familiar face at the front of the room. It was the couple who had first complimented her on her playing months ago. They had become regulars, often visiting the restaurant just to hear her play. They had always been kind and supportive, and they had made it clear how much her music meant to them. This time, though, they weren't just smiling in appreciation. They were looking at her with something more in their eyes, something that made her heart race. The man stepped forward, his expression serious but warm. "You've been incredible," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "I can tell this is your passion, your calling. I've been thinking about something, and I think it's time you thought about it too." Her heart skipped a beat. She was used to compliments, but this felt different. She wasn't sure what he was about to say, but she could tell it was important. "You've got something special," he continued. "I know you've been playing here for a while, and people love your music. But I think it's time you take it further. You don't just have to be the piano player at this restaurant. You have the talent to do more. You could perform at bigger venues, share your music with a larger audience." Her breath caught in her throat. The idea was overwhelming, almost too much to consider. She had never really thought about performing outside the restaurant. It was all so new to her, and the thought of making a living from her music, of stepping into a bigger world, was both exciting and terrifying. The woman beside him smiled gently, her voice kind. "You've brought so much joy to so many people here. You don't know how many times we've heard people talk about how your music has changed their night, their mood, their lives. You're more than just a pianist. You're someone who has the power to make a real impact." The words washed over her, filling her with warmth and disbelief. She had never imagined that her music could mean so much to anyone. She had always thought of it as something personal, something just for her. But hearing their words made her realize that it wasn't just about the music, it was about the connection it created. It was about the way music could change people's lives, even in small ways, and maybe, just maybe, she could do more with it. "I don't know," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's just, this has been my world, and I've always kept my dreams small. I don't know if I'm ready to put myself out there, to step outside of this." The man nodded, understanding. "I get it," he said. "But you'll never know what you're capable of until you take that first step. Don't let fear hold you back. You've got something rare, something beautiful, and there's a whole world out there waiting to hear it." His words resonated deep within her. She had always kept herself small, never daring to dream too big. But now, standing there in the dim glow of the restaurant, hearing the sincerity in his voice, she realized that maybe it was time to stop holding herself back. Maybe it was time to take a leap. After the couple left, she sat at the piano for a long time, the music floating around her like a comforting embrace. She thought about everything she had learned over the past few months. She had come so far, She had gone from being the quiet waitress to being the heart of the restaurant's entertainment, and in that time, she had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own talent. Maybe it was time to believe in the bigger possibilities. She wasn't sure where it would lead her, but she was ready to find out. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of taking the leap. She was ready to make her dreams real. The next week, she began taking steps toward that bigger world. She reached out to local venues, contacted music managers, and started putting herself out there in a way she had never done before. The fear still lingered, but it was different now. She knew that it wasn't about being perfect or having it all figured out. It was about taking the first step, about believing in herself and the music, and so her journey continued. The quiet waitress had found her voice. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for everyone who needed to hear her music, for everyone who needed to feel that connection. And in doing so, she had found a new path for herself, one that was just beginning.